Hello and welcome to this presentation on how to avoid stupid audit non-conformances. My name is Amanda Evans-Lara from HACCP Mentor, and thanks very much Simon for allowing me to give this presentation as part of the International Food Safety Quality Network's Food Safety Fridays. Now, if you haven't heard of me before through my HACCP Mentor website, just a little bit of background information. My name's Amanda Evans-Lara and I've been a food safety compliance specialist for over 20 years now, where I've been working in food safety compliance. I started my life as a food inspector with New South Wales Health, based in Australia, where we would work on tracing products and raw materials as part of food poisoning outbreak investigations. I spent a fair bit of time doing manufacturing inspections and audits, before finally moving on from government around 14 years ago to start my own food safety consultancy business. Now within this business I focus on developing HACCP programs, and product labelling is quite a big area that I do focus on. I'm also currently certified as a food safety auditor, and I have been auditing some of the bigger GFSI standards around SQF, BRC. Although I'm kind of pulled back a lot on auditing now, I still have a big focus in making sure to educate people around what the requirements or the compliance requirements are for the GFSI standards. Another big area that I focus on is online training. Anyway, you can go over to my website at haccpmentor.com if you want to see more information and check out further details on my professional background. Anyway, so let's get into today's training. As I said, it's on how to avoid stupid audit non-conformances. And the purpose of this training that I'm really trying to get through is to give you practical strategies to help you avoid those stupid non-conformances that I have seen at the thousands of audits that I've done over my time, and to help you to be more organised when you come up for your next audit. So as a basis of all of this, we first need to understand what actually is a nonconformance. So you can see on the screen here, a nonconformance is a failure to comply with a requirement of the organisation's quality system. So that means that if you've written in your documentation that you are going to do something and you haven't done it, that will result in a nonconformance. If you have a requirement of a customer standard or a GFSI standard or any type of say audit criteria that you're getting third party or second party audited to, if you fail to comply with that, that would be considered a non-conformance. And then of course, as a base level, any legal requirement. So it doesn't matter where you manufacture your food, if there is a legal requirement that you haven't complied with, that will be a non-conformance. Now, as you being a QA representative, there's a lot of non-conformances that you don't really have control over during the audit process. You just have to remember that auditors are magnets for finding issues. I like to call it a sixth sense. It's also what I believe an auditor's superpower is, to be able to find stuff that you think there is no way that they will find. So just remember that Murphy's Law will always come into play. That being that anything that can go wrong will go wrong during an audit. And this has played out in, I don't know how many audits that I've done, where I've found things that just out of randomly, or things have just kind of magnated towards me. We'll go into this a little bit further later on. So when we start looking at non-conformances, we can roughly group them into four kind of separate areas. So you can see on screen, these are premises, practices, documents, and records. So premises really involves the construction or access or any type of security issues to do with your building or the place that you make the food. Practices are actually what's happening or what's observed. So say the auditor is there just watching the food production. So this is where they may be looking at what people are doing, what the process is doing. So these practices can be focused on the actions of people or the implementation of procedures or policies within your organisation. Our next area is up the top there, documents or documentation. So non-conformances around this is when a standard states that you have to have a certain policy or a procedure or a document in place and you haven't done this. And then our fourth one there is records. So this is generally the result of well, a record is a result of filling out a form, and records are generally used to prove implementation or a result. So there'll be a lot of different non-conformance associated with records. So we'll go into these a little bit further. Some of the stupid non-conformances that I've observed over my 20 years of auditing and doing inspections. So generally things like pests in containers, pest control is always a good one. There was one audit that I was doing where there was a whole shelf of containers all with different ingredients in them. There would have been maybe 20, 30 containers, and the one container that I pulled out to check had pest infestation. So I thought, oh, well, I'll do another sample, pull out another container, and that container that I pulled out didn't have pests in it. I pulled out a third one, didn't have pests. The fourth one didn't have pests. So this is what I was saying to you about being magnated or non-conformance magnating towards the auditor. Another example of a stupid non-conformance is incorrect records or missing records. This one's a bit of a no-brainer. If you're doing your verification process properly, there shouldn't be any incorrect records or missing records. Ones around personal hygiene. Some of these you probably wouldn't believe actually happened in an audit, but they did. I had one guy actually standing up against the wall with their fingers up their nose, picking their nose, oblivious to what was going on around. So in the complete horror of the QA manager and the site manager, we sat there watching this, or stood there watching this guy from a platform above. He didn't know that we were watching him. And then after he proceeded to finish picking his nose, he went straight back onto the packing line. So then, of course, we intervened, and that person had to go through retraining. And I think what was worse is that everybody in the business knew that this guy had caused this particular non-conformance. Another really, really stupid one that I've had is the metal detectors not being turned on during packing. So the type of audits that I was doing, like the GFSI audits, you generally have 2 to 3 months notice that you're going to get audited. So to go onto a production floor and find on the day of the audit that the metal detector wasn't actually turned on and product was going through it was a little bit bemusing on my behalf. So when I questioned the staff as to why the metal detector wasn't turned on, their response was it slows up the process because it keeps rejecting product and we have to get through this production. Not a really good enough reason to be turning the metal detector off, I would have thought. Some other ones that I've seen, the good old one of dirty premises. You can always raise a non-conformance around an area of the premises or premises being dirty. This next one, which actually happened, this is probably about 18 months ago, which is probably the worst one that I've ever seen. I'd gone into the bathrooms, or the staff bathrooms, and I went to the female toilets first, and I could smell a really, really strong urine smell, which I thought, oh, that's kind of a bit disgusting. So I made comment to management as we were going around that this was quite disgusting. And then when we proceeded to go into the male toilets, we walked in just as the cleaner was dipping his mop into the urinal to then go through and mop the floor. So what it was is he was actually washing the floor with a mop that had been dipped or put into the urinal because he was too lazy to go and get a bucket with hot water like a normal kind of cleaning practice would happen. That's probably been one of the most disgusting ones that I've seen. Other general ones, personal items left on machinery, that's a stupid non-conformance. And another one that actually had happened to one of my clients was they had open pest baits on a container. And it was funny how this one came about because I had said to the maintenance guy before the audit, can you just go around the factory and double check that all of the pest-based bait stations have been secured. So thinking that was a fairly straight instruction, just check that they're all secured. So I wasn't really quite sure how when we started walking around with the auditor that all of a sudden there was open pest baits sitting on top of ice cream container lids. So when later I questioned the maintenance guy who was doing the pest control, like what was he thinking to even do this, he said to me, all I heard you say was pest baits, make sure there's some. So he didn't even really, hadn't heard what I'd said or interpreted correctly to being what I had intended. So that was probably a good lesson for me on the day about giving instructions to people and making sure that they understand what is required of them. So yes, of course, the company that I was doing work for at the time got a non-conformance for having that open pest baits. So again, a stupid non-conformance. So that's just a couple of examples of some of the ones that I've seen over the last 20 years. So I'm sure in your businesses you have, when you look back at the non-conformances that you have been given during audits, that you think, oh, I could have avoided that, I could have done things differently. So what we're going to go through now is just some really basic strategies that will help you to avoid these stupid audit non-conformances. Now, I don't consider them to be rocket science. They're not over the top. They're just really basic strategies. But what I found is that people tend to forget the basics and they get tied up in the other requirements of the audit and really forget these basics. So our first strategy is to actually go through and know what you are being audited against. So what you basically have during an audit, which you should know, is an audit criteria. So this is the documented rules that you are being audited against. And these could include things like, like company policies or procedures. There could be customer contract requirements in there if you're supplying to some major retailers. There's industry standards, there's certification standards. So if we start talking about your GFSI standards, your BRC, SQF, you might supply to Walmart, there might be things for Nestle, there might be things, I don't know, for McDonald's, there's 1,000 standards out there. You could be getting audited to legislation or performance contracts. So you need to have a good working knowledge of the actual audit criteria and the scope of your audit, as being this being your first success strategy that you should consider. So it's always beneficial to confirm with the auditor prior to the audit what the actual audit criteria and what the audit scope is. So when we talk about audit scope, this is really what defines the areas, locations, components. What else are we talking about? I don't know. Just the areas within your business that are going to be audited. So these can include things like your entire business. There may be particular locations. So maybe you're just going to be auditing the maintenance shed or the production area or the main office. And this really depends on the type of audit you're having done. So whether it's a third-party certification or whether you're doing internal audits. The process flows. So maybe you're just going to audit a particular product development from raw material to the customer distribution for one line. Say your company has 4 different lines within the business. So maybe you're just going to audit just one of these lines. What else have we got here? We've got maybe just going to be auditing induction of new staff. Maybe it's just an actual procedure that you're going to be auditing or getting audited against. So some of your other individual procedures, maybe it's taking a customer order or how you store hazardous chemicals. So really defining that audit scope is going to put you in a much better position when trying to avoid stupid audit non-conformances. When you actually know the criteria and the scope, you can document and implement your systems, policies, and procedures to comply with those rules. So having this clear understanding of the rules is really just that starting point, and I cannot emphasize that enough, that this puts you and the auditor on at least the same page moving forward. Now, our second strategy is management commitment. So commitment is required at all levels of management to ensure the success of any compliance or audit activity. This is a bit of a no-brainer. If we don't get that management commitment, the audit process can be quite stressful for everybody involved. And for those of you who don't have that commitment currently within your organisation, you will know what I'm talking about, the extra stress involved there. So management commitment can take on lots of different forms, but the underlying requirement is that it starts at the highest level of the business. So the commitment here is required for not only the development and implementation, but also the maintenance of the components within your business that are being audited. So commitment can be displayed through many different actions, which can include things like the provision of human and financial resources. We'll just probably focus on that in this presentation. So when we have a look here, adequate resources are required to be provided to ensure the success of any process, any audit process. So not only do you need the human resources, so the people to actually do the development and the implementation, that's the other important part for human resources, who is going to implement your HACCP system or your food safety system, but also for the maintenance of these business components. So you need this to be able to show these resources during the audit process. So making sure your technical staff are present, that's a big thing, and available during the audit to answer any relevant questions, can not only save the business time and money, but also contribute to a positive audit outcome. If you've got somebody in the business who's responsible for a certain area and they're not there during the audit, it makes it very hard for, say, I don't know, the QA manager may have no decisions around the training part of the business. So if the human resource person isn't there, non-conformances can be easily raised because they can't find the information. So keep that in mind. Our next area or next strategy is audit preparation. So the more prepared you are for the audit, the better your audit result will be. So, and even just in audit preparation, you can save so much money through prior preparation. I can't emphasize this enough. As often, a lot of time is wasted, which you're going to be paying for during an external audit, when files and records cannot be located or the right people are not available. So let's have a look at these following tips to help you during the audit preparation part. So reconfirm the audit criteria and audit scope. So double check with the auditor prior to the audit as to what the criteria and scope is. So we've said this before. If applicable, make sure you have the correct version of the audit criteria. So we see that all of the, especially the GFSI standards, we've had SQF just issue a new version 8. You've had FSSC come out with a version 4 recently. Make sure that you confirm that you are getting audited to the right actual version as well, and that you have updated your documentation to reflect this. So if the audit has done their job correctly, an audit plan should have been provided to you outlining these details. So just make sure you go back and confirm that. That's our first tip. Our second tip is around communication. So communicate to others about the audit. So generally what people fear is the unknown and the unexpected. So let your employees, your team, or other staff members know about the audit in advance. So by giving them information about the audit process and what can be expected, it should kind of go some way to ease any type of anxieties. You may do a training session with your staff on what the audit process involves. You can run some case scenarios on, how would you approach the audit, or how would you answer these questions? To try and make people feel as comfortable as possible, should they be asked during an audit a question by the auditor, or maybe they're asked to perform an activity. So generally, if I've gone in to do an audit, one of the jobs may be to test the operation of the metal detector. So I personally don't do this. I would get one of the workers or one of the food handlers who was working on that line to show me how they actually test the metal detector. Now, sometimes people, they get really nervous around this, and then they fumble and things go wrong and all of that type of stuff. So this is where communicating prior to the audit and giving a bit of training can help your food handlers be a lot more comfortable and a lot more ease should they actually be asked by the auditor to demonstrate any type of competency or be asked any question. Our next area is being organised, having documents and records that are accessible. Now, this is a fairly big one as well. This is what takes time. So making sure that your record and document organisation is in play will definitely help towards you having a successful audit. So you should know where to find information quickly when requested, but better still, you should have a logical document filing and retrieval system, which if you give to the auditor, they should be able to find the information with ease. I was in an audit where basically I walked into the boardroom and they just had all of their folders all on the boardroom table. None. So if you have a look in the picture there's white folders. So they just had all these white folders. There was no labels on these folders or on the covers. Like, it's not like I could just quickly look and go, yep, that's the pest control folder, or that's the cleaning folder, or that's the R&D folder. There was no kind of organisation around that type of stuff. And then I was told, okay, we'll come back in a couple of hours when you've finished doing that. So of course, the type of auditor I am, it was no, I will ask you what I need and you will retrieve that information. So when you have a record and document system that is well organised, it won't be a stress to find this information. So if you do use a paper-based system, obviously make sure it's accessible during the audit and not in any locked filing cabinets. I've seen this as an auditor, people will use the excuse of, oh, we can't access that information because the maintenance guy's not here and he's got the key to the filing cabinet. So for me, that's, if you can't supply the information, it's a non-conformance. It's a really stupid non-conformance when you know you're being audited to not have information available. So if your system is electronic, you need to make sure you've got a backup plan should your computer system fail on the day of the audit. So it may be that you have a cloud-based system where as a backup you have it on somebody's C drive or something like that, or it's on a stick or Dropbox or I don't know, some type of backup system. But the main emphasis here is making sure that that you can provide all the relevant records in one area, and I'll tell you what, that will save a massive amount of time. So like anything in life, the better prepared you are, the easier things will be. So you may have to remember the 5 P's when it comes around. This stuff is, if you've heard of this saying before, prior planning prevents poor performance. So planning is a massive part of making sure that you don't get stupid nor audit non-conformances. Another tip is, which I kind of went on before, kind of touched on before, is making sure those key people are available. So part of the audit part of the audit process requires people to be interviewed and supporting evidence to be collected. So it shouldn't all just be on the shoulders of one person in your organisation, which I normally see it's the QA manager or the QA representative. So different people from different areas of the business may be interviewed to ascertain their understanding of the system and or whatever the requirements are. So they may also be required to answer technical questions asked by the auditor, and deficiencies may be reported or the audit cancelled if evidence or interviews cannot be collected. So keep that in mind as well, that if you don't have your key people available, depending on the type of audit it is, the audit just may get cancelled. So that's going to cost your organisation money to have that audit rescheduled. Or it might be that one of your customers are coming to audit you and they see that you're not taking it seriously, or the commitment's not there, so they may not want to do business with you anymore. So making sure those key people are available. And again, I'll emphasise, it's not on the QA manager's shoulders. The whole audit should not be on their shoulders. It should be split amongst the different areas. So the maintenance guy does his job, the procurement people do their job, the receivable people do their job, HR do their training areas, maybe your production personnel does their areas, whoever has the CCPs, maybe the laboratory does the testing area. So you can kind of get my gist there about making sure that you've got those key people available. Okay, another strategy to make sure you don't get these stupid audit non-conformances is performing an internal audit. And I don't mean a tick and flick internal audit. I mean an actual proper internal audit. So an internal audit can be defined as being basically a review of your business systems, your documentation, your procedures or practices by a skilled person employed or consulting to the business. So I do emphasize skilled. If you go back and have a look at your internal audits now, if you've just got a one-pager, if you were, say, getting audited to SQF or BRC or any of those GFSI standards, if you just have a one-page audit checklist, that is not sufficient. Well, SQF are probably good, and IFS as well. If you get audited to those standards, they actually have audit checklists that you can use. So take advantage, they're free. I think IFS have got a new app now that you can download, which I've did a test run on it, which I found it to be quite useful. So you're basically going through the same checklist as what the external auditor is. So by actually getting on and doing a proper internal audit, you should be finding all the holes in your system before someone else externally comes into your business. So when used appropriately, internal audits can really assist your business by adding value to the organisation's activities, and it really does contribute towards improvement. So an internal audit is recommended to be performed prior to the external audit being undertaken. So generally I would do the internal audit maybe a week or 2 weeks before the external audit, just to make sure everything is entirely up to date, to make sure there's no verification activities that are due that haven't been performed. So actually conducting a really good internal audit provides the opportunity for comparison to be made between the audit criteria and what your current business documentations and practices are. So any issues identified can then be rectified prior to that external audit. And that's the great thing about doing that internal audit just before the external one. And if you do it properly, you really shouldn't be getting stupid audit non-conformances around documentation or records, or say documentation not available, number one, or records not being available, filled out, or incorrect, because you should have picked up all of that stuff prior to the external, or when you did your internal audit. So if the internal audit has been done correctly and thoroughly and against the actual standard or the audit criteria, you shouldn't really get any extra deficiencies. So this is a major factor in reducing also a stressful audit outcome, because it shows that you are prepared, and it shows that you know where your documentation is and you are organised and you're on top of things. you've got your verification activity sorted, and you're not going to get to the external audit and go, oh, sorry, we didn't actually do any micro testing in the last 12 months because we haven't bothered to check that. So doing an internal audit, I can't emphasize that one as well enough. Staff training, like anything to work well in a business, is making sure that staff are adequately trained. So there's a couple of key areas that you should be trained in, and this includes internal auditing, as I just went through the internal audits there. The person needs to be competent, know what they're talking about, know how to write non-conformances and how to actually assess evidence is an area. Again, it's just not tick and flick. So training in internal auditing is essential. You can go and do face-to-face internal auditing. I know IFS have an internal auditor course that they run online. Hasset Mentor also has a on-demand internal auditor course which will take you through the process. Staff should also be trained in what to expect. So I touched on this before about communicating to everybody about what's going on around the audit process. So take a training session with your staff to explain why you're being audited and what the benefits of that audit and what it means for the organisation to be able to maintain a particular audit standard or audit certification. Staff training should also be around your general procedures and processes. So this, it might be on how to operate the metal detector or how to, pack the right product, right packaging. So for labelling, all of that type of training on what you actually do within a business, that can be either formal or informal training. It could be on the job. You could do blended learning, which is it's a blend of face-to-face on the job or online training or on-demand training. So staff training is quite a big area with that as well. So they're our main strategies that we want to ensure help us not to get these stupid audit non-conformances. So if we go back again to what they were, we looked at know what you're being audited against, making sure that you do have that management commitment, making sure that you're prepared during the audit, making sure that you've done an efficient and effective internal audit, and making sure that people have adequate staff training on what to expect and also in the internal auditing process. So just to recap, in this presentation, we've gone through what is a non-conformance. I've also got some other training that I did for the International Food Safety Quality Network. I think my presentation from Food Safety Live 2016 was around non-conformances. So go back and have a look in the IFSQN website under their, I think it's under their resources section, back to Food Safety Live 2016, and you can watch that if you want to learn more about non-conformances. I think we get into corrective actions and root cause and things like that in that presentation. I've given you a few examples of some of the stupid non-conformances that I have seen over the 20 odd years that I've been doing this kind of work around auditing or inspection. I've given you generally like kind of 5 key strategies. So again, that was staff training, internal audits, making sure you do your internal audits, being prepared, getting management commitment, and really knowing what you're being audited against. And just back on that training of staff again. So that's a really, really strong emphasis is around staff training. So that brings me to the end of my session. So thanks very much for watching. If you want to learn or keep up to date with any other compliance issues, just jump over onto the Hasset Mentor website and you can sign up to go on a mailing list that'll keep you up to date with and give you some other tips on how to comply with certain GFSI standards and other food safety aspects. So with this presentation being pre-recorded, obviously I can't answer the questions live, but what I do suggest is if you can, when Simon posts this presentation, you can put any of your questions beneath the presentation in the International Food Safety Quality Network website. So that's ifsqn.com. So underneath the presentation, whack your questions in there and then I'll get on and answer them. Alternatively, you can email me at amanda@hassopmentor.com and I'll be quite happy to answer any questions then. And as we've gone through the presentation, Simon may have also been able to answer some of your questions if you've been using the chat feature. So thanks very much again. Thank you, Simon, and thank you to the International Food Safety Quality Network for hosting these Food Safety Fridays as a great way to educate the industry. Thanks again. Bye.